Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Audrey author of The Mission Driven Life and founder of The Mission Driven Mom. I'm so excited for you to be joining me today. We're going to talk about some really interesting stuff. If you are new to this podcast, you can keep listening along with me. You also may want to go back to the beginning of the podcast and do a little binge listening. You will get a really nice deep dive into the 7 laws of life mission and hear a bunch of mission driven stories and get a good sense for what we do here and why you can live a mission driven life and how that will change the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, and the way you live. If you have not gone to themissiondrivenmom.com and grabbed your copy of The Mission Driven Life, Discover and Fulfill Your Unique Contribution to the World, my book, please go get your free copy of the audiobook. It's there. There's several places you can opt in on the homepage, and it's the whole thing. So there's no reason that you can't understand what mission driven living is and begin to engage in it yourself. I tell the story of the Ten Boom family. There are many, many stories I could tell. As I said on this podcast, there's lots of mission driven stories where I talk about men and women who lived those 7 laws and how they did so. In the book, I talk about the Ten Boom family. They are incredible, amazing heroes of mine, and they saved the lives of over 800 Jews during World War II, but they did so much more than that. But the great thing is that the Ten Booms didn't always have it together, just like you and I just don't have it together. And by following in their footsteps, we can become a little bit more like them. And the 7 laws help us to do that. I want to tell you a story today about a little boy. And this is really, really fascinating because little Jack was walking down the street one day, and sadly, he was hit by a school bus. From the moment that he had the accident and in the weeks that followed, his mom always called it the horrible accident. And every day she would tell the story about how Jack was hit by this bus and he broke both his legs and he was in a wheelchair and it was so terrible. Now she felt guilty that she had not been there to protect him, although how could she have been? And seeing him in a wheelchair was really, really difficult for her. Now, when he went to the doctors, they just didn't see any reason why he wasn't going to have a complete recovery. But his mom kept warning him that his legs might not ever fully heal. She wanted him to be aware that he might not ever play soccer or even run again like the other kids. The doctors medically cleared him to go back to school, but his mom and dad were convinced that if he were at the school and he saw school buses regularly, that it would traumatize him and it would be too much for him. So they decided that the mother was going to quit her job and homeschool him for the rest of the year. They also knew, or thought they knew, that it would be terrible for him to be sitting in the wheelchair watching his friends play at recess. And so they decided they'd better just keep him home and have him homeschool with his mom to take him away from all of the triggers and all of the pain points that would certainly be out there in the world. Well, he usually got his school work done in the mornings, and then he had the whole rest of the day to kill. So he would watch a lot of TV and play video games. And within a few weeks, his mood was tanking. He was becoming more and more depressed. Well, when his parents saw this, they were certain that he has been traumatized by the accident more than they thought he had been or would be, and that they needed to get him into therapy. So they found a therapist that specialized in children and they brought him in. She had all this expertise on childhood trauma, and they just really hoped that she would be able to help him. Now, when Jack's mother wheeled him into the therapist's office, Jack was staring silently at the floor. He was so embarrassed and so depressed and so sad. And his mother began by saying, "We're having such a hard time with this terrible accident. It's really ruined our lives and caused a lot of emotional problems for Jack. He's just not the same little boy." But to his mother's surprise, the therapist didn't respond with sympathy. Instead, she turned to Jack enthusiastically, and the first words out of her mouth were these: "Boy, have I been looking forward to meeting you, Jack. I've never met a kid who could beat a school bus." You have to tell me, how did you manage to get into a fight with a school bus and win? For the first time since the accident, Jack smiled. Over the next few weeks, Jack worked with the therapist on making his own book. He appropriately named it How to Beat a School Bus. And he created a wonderful story about how he managed to fight a school bus and escape with only a few broken bones. He ended the book with a drawing of himself in a wheelchair wearing a superhero cape. They made provisions for him to go back to school, and he became a normal, happy, well-adjusted boy yet again. The therapist had to work with the parents and help them to see, and this is the message of our podcast today, that they were seeing Jack wrong. Now, why was this mother doing this? I don't know all the reasons, but some of the reasons are because she was afraid. She was afraid of watching Jack not fully recover, all of the what ifs. What if he couldn't run? What if he couldn't live a normal life? What if things never came back to normal? And so she was partially motivated by her own fears of what might happen and the pain that she would experience going through those struggles with Jack. And so, in order to emotionally prepare herself, and I'm sure she felt she was emotionally preparing her son, she felt like she had to speak the worst ongoing. So, if things were any better than the worst case scenario that she was coming up with, then that would be a relief. She was also, as we know, partly driven by guilt. She had not been able to protect her son from this big, bad, horrible thing. And so she was guilt driven in her approach to this particular problem. And she felt sorry for him. She thought that the best thing that she could do was show ongoing, constant pity. But actually, fundamentally, at the very bottom of all of this was the core problem. And the core problem was that she saw Jack as broken and incapable of overcoming his accident. If she had known, if she really, truly, deep down inside believed that he was going to be fine, that he would overcome it emotionally, physically, just fine, that he would go back to school, that he wouldn't be traumatized by seeing a bus, that he would be able to sit and watch his friends play on the playground and be just fine and laugh and play and wait to the moment when he was out of his wheelchair because after all he had was broken legs. But she projected onto him all of the things that she would have hated in his situation, maybe the ways that she thought that she would have reacted. And instead of really feeling confident in herself that her son was capable and competent, she saw him as broken, talked about him as if he was broken, and treated him as if he was broken. And what's fascinating is it's such a great little story that encapsulates so many really powerful principles because it's easy to see in this scenario how she was actually creating the trauma in her son. As soon as he was presented with someone who saw him fundamentally differently, there wasn't any more problem. As soon as the therapist came in and was like, "You're incredible. You beat the school bus." He was happy. He was smiling. It was a challenge. It was a total reframing of himself. And when he was able to see himself differently, everything changed. He came out of his slump. All the doors were opened back up, and he was able to heal and overcome the problem that he faced. I'm going to tell you another story. This is from Stephen Covey. He says that he and his wife were struggling with a son, one of their sons. He was having a difficult time in school. He didn't know how to follow instructions on the tests, and he didn't obviously do well on them. He was socially very immature and was often embarrassing to the people that he was with. So when he would be with his family or with his friends, he would do or say things that seemed really immature and it would embarrass them. Athletically, he was really small and skinny and uncoordinated. When he was swung a bat, for example, he would swing it almost before the ball was pitched and everybody would laugh at him. So Stephen Covey and his wife were just so desperate to help this son. And they really felt like they were trying everything. They wanted him to be completely successful in every area of his life. So Covey says that the first thing that they did was work on their attitudes and their behaviors toward him. And they tried to work on his. He says, we attempted to psych him up using positive mental attitude techniques. Come on, son, you can do it. We know you can. Put your hands a little higher on the bat and keep your eye on the ball. Don't swing till it gets close to you. And if he did a little better, we would go to great lengths to reinforce it. That's good, son. Keep it up. While others laughed, we reprimanded them. Leave him alone. Get off his back. He's just learning. And our son would cry and insist that he'd never be any good and that he didn't like baseball anyway. Nothing we did seemed to help, and we were really worried. We could see the effect this was having on his self-esteem. We tried to be encouraging and helpful and positive, but after repeated failure, we finally drew back and tried to look at the situation on a different level. Luckily for Covey and his wife and their son, after they had tried all the other things they knew how to try, they decided to try to work on their own perceptions. Now, I don't know all the methods that they used to do that, but eventually they came to see that they were seeing him wrong and that how they were seeing him was having a far bigger impact on him and on them than they thought. Because again, they thought he was fundamentally underdeveloped academically, physically, socially, that he was inept, that he couldn't show up and do things well. He goes on, we began to realize that what we were doing to help our son was not in harmony with the way we really saw him. When we honestly examined our deepest feelings, we realized our perception was that he was basically inadequate, somehow behind. No matter how much we worked on our attitudes and behaviors, our efforts were ineffective because despite our actions and words, what we really communicated to him was, you aren't capable. You have to be protected. We began to realize that if we wanted to change the situation, we would first have to change ourselves. And to change ourselves effectively, we had to change our perceptions and paradigms. I had a podcast that I did recently where I talked about paradigms and how paradigms are everything. Go listen to that podcast in conjunction with this one because it's really, really helpful. I've told the story a lot of times about my first time reading Leadership and Self-Deception, how I had these really broken, unhealthy relationships with extended family, and how I thought it was all them. I was projecting it onto them, that they were the ones that dressed their kids up, the same and left my daughter out, and they were the ones that, I don't know, whatever, were like less than morally or whatever my story was that I was telling myself. But in the end, the problem was how I saw them. I saw them as basically less than me because I was always judging them and I was holding myself up as somehow morally superior. It was ridiculous. And because I didn't see them properly, I was distorting the whole relationship with just the way that I was seeing them. Leadership and self-deception helped me understand that no matter what my attitudes and behaviors were, just like Covey was saying, that how I really felt, how I really saw them was impossible to hide. That's what was always going to get communicated. And so that's why it's so important that we work on our basic perceptions and we see others as creators. This goes back to everything we do in the MDM Academy around drama and understanding victimhood. And I've podcasted about that recently as well. Because when we see people wrongly, we are usually seeing them as victims. In both of these situations, they had seen their child as a victim. In Cubby's case, he was a victim of like his own biology or not growing into himself at a certain time or for whatever reasons, like he wasn't capable. And with Jack, it was just that he'd been in this accident. So when we don't see others as victims, when we're not seeing them properly, sometimes we see them as persecutors. That's what I was doing with my extended family. They were making me unhappy. They were leaving me out. And part of that was me just being jealous of them and not being honest about the fact that I was jealous of them. And so I cast them in the role of persecutor, right? I've also had, and I've talked about that in this podcast as well, that I've had children tell me that they felt like I wanted to fix them. Well, why would they say that? Because I'm acting like a rescuer. So these wrong perceptions of how we see people, that we don't see them properly, is usually because we are casting ourselves and them in the drama cycle somewhere. And what I'm here to tell you today is that if you have a relationship with someone that's unsatisfactory to you, if you're not really unified and connecting the way that you want to, you probably want to review some of these last few podcasts that I've done and think more deeply about how it is that you're seeing them and how it is that you can change that paradigm, how you can go from living in a drama cycle, living there and casting them in those roles, to casting yourself and them in the role of creator. It really does change everything. You know, I've said often, this is not a secret, that my husband was a pornography addict for a long time, and I knew about it before we got married, and it got worse, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I've interacted with a lot of women whose husbands have some kind of addiction, often a pornography addiction or worse. And what a lot of these women tend to do is horribilize their husbands. In other words, they treat their husbands like persecutors. They cast them in the role of the big bad guy who's intentionally trying to hurt them, who's putting other women before them and intentionally engaging in this behavior. Now, other women, on the other hand, will cast their husbands in the role of victim. How they've had this since they were young, or they got exposed to it in some way, and they can't overcome it and they can't choose differently. And neither of those things are true. And when you cast them in the role of persecutor, you're going to horribilize them. You're going to gossip about them. You're going to have all kinds of wrong perceptions about them. Every time we put ourselves or others in that drama cycle, we distort reality. We don't see anything or anyone clearly anymore. The truth is that everyone is a creator. As a child of God, it is in our DNA. And we are creating all the time. We cannot not create. The husband that's addicted to pornography is a creator. That means he can overcome it. That means he is capable and competent of finding answers, and you are capable and competent as his wife of bearing with the pain and the struggle of finding those answers and being patient with the healing and recovery process. I have a statement that I listen to. I recorded it as a voice memo. I listen to it every day. It's my creator statement. It's so helpful. And one of the things that I tell myself every day is I see myself and others as creators who are capable and competent, able to navigate life successfully. I even have another phrase where I talk about how I trust that I and others are having the experiences we need to have for our ultimate good. That framing is so helpful. It just puts me back right where I need to be, right at the beginning of my day. I'm a creator, you're a creator. We're having experiences because those experiences can sculpt and change us. We can learn from them, we can grow by them, and we are capable and competent to overcome our challenges, to be the creators that find the solutions. Maybe we don't want to today. Maybe we're not ready today, but that doesn't make us incapable and it doesn't make us incompetent. If you're in a relationship with somebody and you don't like how things are going and you really want things to be different, then here's my challenge to you. I want you to sit down with yourself and ask yourself honestly, am I casting this person anywhere in the drama cycle? Do I see them as a persecutor or a rescuer or as a victim? And why do I see them that way? Try to be incredibly honest with yourself and ask yourself, do I really think that they probably can't do it? And if that's how you really feel, ask yourself, why? Why do you feel they're incapable? Now, sometimes there might be something legitimate, like Look, they're full grown and they're 5'6", so they're probably not going into the NBA, and that's like the dream. But they're capable and competent of figuring that out for themselves. You can just trust that they're having the experiences they need to have for their ultimate good. And that can be unbelievably painful when it looks like they're hurting themselves or they're headed towards disaster or this path that they're on is not going to work out. But they are a creator. They can do it. Who am I and who are you to limit them? Who are you and I to decide that it can't be done? Just like in the case of Covey, he goes on to talk about his son. He says, through deep thought and the exercise of faith and prayer, we began to see our son in terms of his own uniqueness. We saw within him layers and layers of potential that would be realized but at his own pace and speed. Instead of trying to set some kind of weird, unrealistic, or arbitrary bar that he was supposed to rise to, or some timelines that you decide need to happen, or they could have decided needed to happen. They just decided to slow down and calm down and let nature take its course. I've got a child that's disappointed with where they're at right now in their life, and they wish that they were further ahead. And I keep reassuring them, there's no race. We're not running a race. You're not in competition with anybody. There's no rule that said that you were supposed to check some box by the age that you're at. That's just not how life works. Because you're capable and you're competent and you can solve this problem. He goes on, we decided to relax and get out of his way and let his own personality emerge. We saw our natural role as being to affirm and value him. How different is that? If you're with him and he does something that you think is kind of embarrassing, and instead of being embarrassed by it, you just think it's genuinely funny. You just don't let it bother you. We also conscientiously worked on our motives and cultivated internal sources of security so that our own feelings of worth were not dependent on our children's acceptable behavior. I cannot drill that more deeply into my own brain. I cannot tell you how vital that last phrase is for healthy, happy mothering. We have to have our own sources of security. This is why we do the MDM Academy. This is why it's so vital to your mental, emotional, spiritual, physical health that you meet your needs, you manage your heart and mind, and you discover your gifts, you learn to live in a principled way, you go out there and understand worldviews and servant leadership, and you play a role in your community helping other people come to truth because you need that own inner confidence. My ego was far too tied to my children's choices for a long time, and it made me unhappy. And you know what? It was no good for them because it's just like with Cubby, like, where was I even coming up with these standards or these minimums or these expectations that I arbitrarily set? That wasn't helping anyone. So you and I need to cultivate internal sources of security so that our own feelings of worth are not dependent on our children's acceptable behavior. 100%. And that means working on you. So this thing that we say to ourselves as mom is, this is my children's time, or I can only focus on them right now, or I can only afford to spend money on them, or whatever you're telling yourself is just such a lie because they need to live their own lives. So I cannot emphasize enough just how vital it is that you and I dial in our own gifts and talents, that we bring our children on a journey to live a mission-driven life so that they know what that looks like and feels like and smells like and sounds like, that they've been there, they've watched you do it, and now that's something they want for themselves. Covey goes on, as we loosened up our old perception of our son and developed value-based motives, new feelings began to emerge. We found ourselves enjoying him instead of comparing or judging him. We stopped trying to clone him in our own image or measure him against social expectations. We stopped trying to kindly, positively manipulate him into an acceptable social mold. Because we saw him as fundamentally adequate and able to cope with life, we stopped protecting him against the ridicule of others. This is again one more voice in the myriad of voices that teach the same key principle. You are a creator, they are creators. See yourself and others as creators. If something is going wrong and your interactions are feeling ugly, if you're falling into despair about a certain person or a certain relationship, ask yourself, how can I see them more as a creator? How can I affirm to myself and to them that they are capable and competent? And just saying the words and just thinking of all the reasons why they can. There's this beautiful phrase by Earl Nightingale. He says, stop thinking of all the reasons that you can't and think of all the reasons that you can. In the case of this relationship with whoever it is, think of all the reasons why they can. And by virtue of the fact that you're thinking differently about it, you're going to communicate differently, even if it's just in your body language, and that they will know, wow, they believe in me. They think I can do it. Why do they think I can do it? And they'll still struggle with their own self-doubt until they don't. So, one last little section. He, their son, had been nurtured on this protection. So we went through some withdrawal pains, which he expressed and which he accepted, but did not necessarily respond to. We don't need to protect you, was the unspoken message. You're fundamentally okay. In the words of David Emerald, you are a creator that can overcome this too. As the weeks and months passed, he began to feel a quiet confidence and affirmed himself. He began to blossom at his own pace and speed. He became outstanding as measured by standard social criteria, academically, socially, and athletically at a rapid clip, far beyond the so-called natural developmental process. So he grew into what would have seemed normal and then went way beyond it as he grew into himself. And he was able to do this because the people around him stopped seeing him and treating him and responding to him as a victim. They saw him as capable and competent, able to navigate life successfully. And that's what you and I can do. That's what we can affirm to ourselves every single day. And as we affirm that we are creators and the people around us are creators, and we refuse to be in drama toward anyone, to see them as a persecutor or to see them as a victim or even as our rescuer, and we take control and ownership of ourselves, our thoughts, our actions, our perceptions, and paradigms, we empower everyone around us to really truly blossom. We stop trying to shortcut the natural processes and the law of the harvest, and we let them grow through the aches and pains of life to gain their own strength to manage life successfully. They can do it. You can do it. We can do it as mothers, as friends, as spouses. We can become the creators that we were divinely designed to be. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this information was helpful to you. If you have not gone and gotten your free audiobook copy of The Mission Driven Life, go to themissiondrivenmom.com right now and go grab that for yourself, and I will see you next time.